Good evening, everybody. I I've been listening to just a little bit of this. I haven't listened to all of it, but I've listened to enough of it to know that it speaks volumes about what has went on in and during the course of me being a Tennessean in the state of Tennessee. That a lot of people either don't know about or has forgot about in regards to this. In 1979, August 11th, I fell off of a 4-story building in Milan, Tennessee. That was the A.O. Smith building. That broke both of my legs in about 25 pieces apiece, crushed both ankles in about 25 pieces apiece, crushed 3 vertebrae, ruptured 2 discs in the lower part of my back, and broke both arms. Laid in the hospital 6 weeks and 3 days flat on my back down in Jackson, Tennessee. It was a rough winter that winter. And I guess because of us not having good circuitry with TV, we just was not really familiar with the story that was going on up in Nashville. But if you don't mind, please listen to this particular story about the corruption that has been ingrained in the Tennessee politics now, I guess, for years and years and years, towards a Yahoo state, towards people literally thinking that they can do whatever that they want to do in whatever manner that they want to do it in. Now, keep in mind, in 2005, I was very familiar with the Tennessee Waltz case that come up in regards to some hanky-pankying and some illegitimacy going on up in Music City, up in Nashville. But I had no earthly ideal about what you're fixing to witness on this particular program. So if you don't mind, please listen, and then I'll get back with a comment. Thank you.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour as well. Pop quiz, real quick. Don't think too hard about it. Pop quiz. What is the greatest Sissy Spacek movie of all time? Obvious right answer. Coal Miner's Daughter, right? Where Sissy Spacek plays Loretta Lynn. There's none better. Absolutely fantastic. Now, you are forgiven if your answer instead was Carrie, the classic horror movie epic. She personally was epic in that. But, it's a hard call. Sissy Spacek has had such a great career, right? North Country, Affliction, so many great films. Here's one, though, that deserves consideration anew. 1985, movie by the name of Marie. It was a true story. Sissy Spacek was the lead and title character. She played a little-known Tennessee state official named Marie Raggianti. Marie Raggianti was a whistleblower in a big scandal in the state of Tennessee, a big scandal that had just an astonishing ending, an ending that we apparently as a country need to study now at the end of the Trump administration, because this scandal is literally the only thing I know of in our modern American history that might help us out in terms of what's supposed to happen now and how the craziness we are living through right now is supposed to resolve. And luckily, this one isn't just history that we have to look up like in random PhD theses and old newspapers. Trust me, I have done that with lots of state level scandals. Luckily, this one really does have a Sissy Spacek movie all about it, so you can cheat and just watch the movie. It's a movie in which the New York Times praised Sissy Spacek as, quote, effortlessly evolving from a battered young wife to a self-possessed official, giving yet another guileless, radiant performance of unusual immediacy. You can cheat on this part of your civics dork homework. You can just watch Marie, Sissy Spacek, 1985. And the Times praising her for her unusual immediacy in that role. Indeed, that was true then. It is unusually immediately relevant right now to what's happening in our country right now at this car crash end of this bizarre presidency. But it is worth knowing what happened. That became the basis for that movie in 1985. What happened is this. There was this Dixiecrat politician in Tennessee named Ray Blanton. Ray Blanton had been in the Tennessee state legislature, sort of an undistinguished run there. He ran for Congress from Tennessee in 1966 as an old, reconstructed Dixiecrat Democrat. He ran as a pro-segregation candidate for Congress in 1966.
Probably had something to do with the death of Bilford Pulser. That's a completely different story in regard to Walking Tall. So let's get on to hear what she has to say.
Congress had a few terms there, did basically nothing. But while he was there, distinguished himself as an, unreconstructed Southern Democrat, inveighing against the dirty hippies and the anti-war movement, voting against the extension of the Voting Rights Act. He was a real peach. In 1974, that politician, Ray Blanton, got elected governor of the great state of Tennessee. And while he was governor, he gave his family's road building company a state contract. And guys in his administration started selling off state-owned cars to their friends and cronies at a discount. He was basically a terrible and corrupt governor. But in 1978, after his time as Tennessee governor, Ray Blanton was on his way out. He was not going to run for another term. They held an election in November 1978 to pick the next governor. A Republican named Lamar Alexander won that gubernatorial election in Tennessee to replace Ray Blanton. Ray Blanton had trashed Lamar Alexander. He called him a choir boy, did his best to keep Lamar Alexander from winning, but Lamar Alexander won. And after that 1978 election, Ray Blanton is on his way out, but he's in his lame duck period, right? So he knows he's not going to be governor for long, but he's there for a little while until the inauguration, until Lamar Alexander comes in. And in that lame duck period, stuff starts to go really haywire. Blanton gets hauled in before a federal grand jury to testify in an FBI investigation into whether or not his administration was offering pardons for state prisoners, get out of jail free cards, in exchange for cash bribes. Blanton himself, the governor himself, got hauled in to testify in front of the grand jury in that investigation. 3 of Blanton's staffers, including his chief counsel, got hit with felony charges in that investigation for selling pardons in exchange for cash. And this all happens after the election, after Blanton knows he's leaving office, right? When he's in this lame duck period before the new governor is going to get sworn in. On January 4th, during that lame duck period, the local paper in Nashville reports that not only was the bribery for pardons investigation ongoing, but the grand jury had heard tapes, right? Had tapes of the bribery exchanges happening, people caught red-handed. 2 days after that appears in the Nashville paper, Blanton himself admits to reporters that the FBI has told him directly that he himself, not just his staffers who have been charged, but he himself, the outgoing governor, is a target of the FBI, a target of this federal bribery investigation. They said it's not just his aides, it's the governor himself that they believe was involved in selling pardons to state prisoners for money. And then something really amazing happened. Governor Blanton, having been basically caught in this scandal with his staffers under indictment, including one who was arrested and frog-marched out of his office in the state capitol, Governor Ray Blanton, having been told by the FBI that he himself was the target of this investigation, he just brushed it off and decided he was going to go whole hog. He was still the governor, and he was going to get what people paid for. Just after 11 p.m. on a Monday night, and this is the last week that he's serving his term as governor. The inauguration of the new governor is scheduled for the following weekend on Saturday. This is Monday night before the inauguration. It's between 11 p.m. and midnight. Governor Ray Blanton walks out of his office in the state capitol, and he announces that he just pardoned 52 state prisoners. 23 of them were murderers. One of the murderers was the son of one of his major political supporters and donors. The son had only served a few months of his sentence for double murder. The guy had shot his wife and another person 18 times. He put 18 bullets in them, and he did it with a 2-shot Derringer pistol, which meant he had to stop and reload that little pistol at least 8 times in order to get all 18 bullets into them when he killed them. Governor Blanton explained that he pardoned the guy because he thought it was probably a crime of passion, so the guy should just get time served. Reloaded 8 times? The governor, at this point, has less than a week in office. He is under investigation, under federal investigation for selling pardons, and he does this. 52 of them, including more than 20 murderers. That happens late on Monday night, before the Saturday inauguration. Tuesday morning, Tennessee wakes up to this news and is somewhat astonished that he's doing this, right? While he's under FBI investigation for doing this sort of thing for money, while his staffers are under arrest for allegedly being the bagmen taking money for him on this. So Monday night, he announces these pardons. Tuesday, the state of Tennessee is like, what is going on? What just happened here? And then Wednesday, the next day, the U.S. attorney, top federal prosecutor leading that case in Tennessee, all of 37 years old, himself a Democrat, appointed by Democratic President Jimmy Carter, that U.S. attorney gets a call from the FBI, and the FBI tells him that before Blanton goes, before the new governor gets sworn in on Saturday to replace Blanton, the FBI has word, they have indications that Governor Ray Blanton is going to issue a bunch more pardons, including all the rest of the cases that led to the bribery charges and that are the subject of the ongoing bribery investigation of which he is a target. In other words, between that day and the day he finally has to leave office, the following Saturday, the FBI believes he's going to make good on the bribes that were already arranged for those pardons. He, in fact, is going to sell them off. And once people are pardoned, it's not like you can do anything about it. You can't take it back. So the U.S. attorney gets this intel from the FBI on Wednesday. And the U.S. attorney does something quite extraordinary that Wednesday afternoon. He calls up the Republican, 38 years old, the new young guy who was just elected governor to replace Blanton, the guy who was due to be sworn in on Saturday. He calls Lamar Alexander, and he tells him on the phone, the way he quoted himself later to a newspaper describing what he said. He said to Lamar Alexander, "I think you've got to take office early in order to stop what's going on." Inauguration for the new guy isn't supposed to be for another 3 days at this point, right? This is Wednesday. The inauguration isn't until Saturday. But that day, that Wednesday, when the U.S. attorney calls Lamar Alexander, they thought the totally uncowed, brazenly criminal governor was going to deliver on his bribes in a way that would be legally irreversible. And so the U.S. attorney and the legislature and the leaders of the legislature and Lamar Alexander and the Democrats in office alongside Blanton, who weren't part of these schemes, they all spend the day scouring state law and looking into exactly the terms that set that inauguration date for Saturday. How firm is that? Turns out it was a little woolly, maybe not that firm. And by God, they did it. They kept it under wraps over the course of that day, that Wednesday. They summoned the Capitol Press Corps to the state Supreme Court that night without telling the reporters what they were coming in to see. And surprise, what they were there to see was the swearing in of this new governor 3 days early, without telling the guy who still thought he had the job. They didn't tell Blanton until after Lamar Alexander was already sworn in, because they didn't want him to know his term was ending 3 days earlier than he expected. They didn't want him to be able to deliver those allegedly bought and paid for pardons before he went. It was absolutely bizarre. And of course, it was national news.
Ray Blanton expected to be governor of Tennessee until Saturday, but the state hastily replaced him last night by swearing in a new governor 3 days early, because in Blanton's last days in office, he was releasing huge numbers of convicts from the state prisons, including murderers, and planned to release more. Kenley Jones was in Nashville.
These are not very happy days for Tennessee. This is not a happy day for me.
With that, Republican Governor Lamar Alexander was sworn into office 3 days early. to prevent the outgoing governor, Democrat Ray Blanton, from freeing any more state prisoners. Earlier this week, Blanton commuted the sentences of 52 prisoners, including some murderers, and was reportedly considering the release of at least 18 others before he was stopped. When Blanton learned of the swearing in last night after it was over, he denied he had done anything wrong and said he was hurt.
There is such a thing as courtesy, and I would have thought that there would have been a little bit of courtesy in informing me of the action before it happened.
Several officials in Blanton's administration are the targets of a federal grand jury investigation into payoffs for pardons and paroles of state prisoners. Blanton himself was called to testify before the grand jury. At a news conference today, the new governor said information given him by the U.S. District Attorney is what led to the early swearing in.
He told me that he had substantial reason to believe the governor was about to release one or more persons from the state prison who were the targets of the United States investigation into payoffs to release people from our prisons. He asked me to take office in order to prevent that.
Alexander said there is nothing he can do about the release of prisoners earlier this week while Blanton was still governor. Blanton has said he does not intend to run for political office again. A state legislator here was quoted as saying, "It's a good thing, because the people of Tennessee will never pardon him for what he has done."
The people will never pardon him for what he has done. It's a remarkable story, right? New governor, surprise, sworn in early to stop what was believed to be a crime in progress.
So let's stop this right here. I promise you, I've not seen any more of this than what you have right now. Is she trying to go into the direction of heading off Donald Trump's presidency by swearing in Joe Biden as him being the president of the United States? That way, whatever other damage that Donald Trump can possibly do between now and the next 50 days will basically be void. Is that where this commentator is trying to take us? I don't know. Let's see. I'm interested. I mean, it was a very intriguing story about what went on, because like I said in the beginning, in 1979, I wasn't thinking about politics. I wasn't thinking about world affairs. I wasn't thinking about what was going on up in Nashville, Tennessee. And to be quite frank with you, I don't think that we had adequate television back then, because the majority of people back then was still getting their TV stations through rabbit ears and other means. I don't even think we had a TV during the winter months, because I remember staying outside my father and mother's house in an RV, and my wife at the time, Vicky, was taking care of me as a home nurse, because like I said, I had 2 broken legs and 2 crushed ankles, and I was trying to recuperate from a major incident, an accident that had happened in my life towards falling off a 4-story building. I remember the RV was so small that you couldn't really go down the hallway with crutches. So I got to the point that I would basically get around from one spot to another by getting around on my knees. In other words, I would get out of the bed, go to the bathroom, I'd lift myself up on the pot, and I'd use the bathroom by myself, and I'd get down, and I'd come back into the bed or the couch or wherever else that we was staying at. I remember that winter being awful cold, extremely cold that year. There wasn't but 1 or 2 other winters that met that same type of criteria. I believe it was in 82 and 83 and possibly 84 here in the state of Tennessee. And since then, I've not seen no more other winners that have exceeded or even come close to those type of winners that we was having back then. But it was extremely cold, and I had no earthly idea that this was going on up in the upper Appalachia.
That would be irreversible if it was allowed to go forward. Ray Blanton's staffers did do prison time for their role in selling gubernatorial pardons for cash in the state of Tennessee. Blanton himself did a couple of years in federal prison for extortion and conspiracy, for putting other official acts up for sale while he was governor. He was apparently also selling things like liquor licenses for the low cost of a $23,000 bribe slipped into his pocket. And in 1985, a fair to middling Sissy Spacek movie was made about the whole scandal, with Spacek starring as the head of the state parole board who blew the whistle on the scandal when she realized that parole and clemency was being sold. She's the one who called the FBI. And Blanton, of course, did his best to destroy her for it. In the end, Marie Rajianti is the one who got the Hollywood movie made about her. Governor Ray Blanton is the one who went to prison and then died young. His last jobs were working at a car dealership and selling prefab metal buildings. The United States Senate saw some big and interesting changes today. Mark Kelly was sworn in to the Arizona U.S. Senate seat formerly held by Senator John McCain. Kelly's swearing in marks the first time since the 1950s that Arizona has had 2 Democrats in its 2 Senate seats. At the same time, the Senate today got a farewell address from a senator named Lamar Alexander. The same Lamar Alexander who was just absolutely flummoxed by that call he got from the U.S. attorney on that Wednesday in January, 41 years ago, telling him that he was going to have to take office 3 days early to stop that corrupt outgoing governor from giving out irrevocable pardons that were illegally bought and paid for. They needed him to take office to stop a crime in progress. Lamar Alexander did not want to do that, but he did it at the request of law enforcement. Lamar Alexander would serve 2 terms as governor in Tennessee after that weird start. He served 3 terms in the United States Senate. He is now 80 years old and retiring from public service. He made a plea for bipartisan cooperation as his closing speech in the U.S. Senate today. One of the things this speech will be remembered for today is that the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, broke down in tears saying goodbye to Senator Alexander today. Mitch McConnell was actually quite unable to compose himself. He was very, very upset in his remarks saying goodbye to his friend. But it is just a remarkable snake eating its tail, or maybe a puppy chasing its tail moment for history. For Lamar Alexander to have entered the national spotlight in public life because of a brazen, fearless, outgoing official, lame duck official accused of corrupting the pardon process for his own benefit. That's how he entered national news for the first time ever. And now today, Lamar Alexander leaves the national spotlight in public life amid a brazen, maybe fearless, outgoing, lame duck official accused of corrupting the pardon process, this time federally, for his own purposes. After the New York Times reported last night that President Trump has discussed issuing blanket preemptive pardons to his eldest son, Don Jr., to his second son, Eric, the blonde one, to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and to his daughter, Ivanka Trump. After that was reported last night by the New York Times, tonight we learned from a court filing, first reported by CNN reporter Kara Scannell, that Ivanka Trump was deposed yesterday in the District of Columbia in a case brought by the Attorney General there over alleged misuse of funds by the Trump Inaugural Committee. You'll remember that the illegal funneling of foreign money into the Trump Inaugural Committee was already the subject of one of the successful federal prosecutions that derived from the Mueller investigation. A man named Samuel Patton convicted in conjunction with illegal foreign money being brought into the Trump Inaugural. Now, this one in D.C., for which Ivanka Trump was just deposed, this is not a federal case. It's one brought by the Attorney General in the District of Columbia. But the documents just released in that case show not only that Ivanka Trump was deposed in this case yesterday, but the head of Trump's inaugural committee, Tom Barrack, the huge Trump donor, he was deposed in this case not 2 weeks ago. The documents released by the court related to this case today also show that First Lady Melania Trump has been subpoenaed in conjunction with this case, again, about alleged massive misuse of funds for the Trump inaugural. Now, I should mention this is separate from the New York State investigation that has reportedly zeroed in on the Trump Organization making allegedly illegal payments to Ivanka Trump and then writing them off for tax purposes. That's a separate matter entirely, but one in which Ms. Ivanka Trump does also appear to be in the crosshairs. And it should be noted that the president can only issue pardons for federal crimes, not for state crimes or for the kind of case that's being brought in the District of Columbia over the inaugural committee here. But in the past 48 hours, we have learned that the U.S. Justice Department has been investigating some kind of alleged cash for pardon scheme involving the president's pardon powers and clemency powers, involving officials at the White House. We have learned that the president is actively discussing preemptive pardons for all of his children. And we have learned that the president has recently been in active discussions about also pardoning preemptively his made-for-TV lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who was reported to have been under federal criminal investigation as recently as this past summer, before we suddenly stopped hearing all about that. And then Attorney General William Barr fired the prosecutor who was overseeing that office in SDNY that was apparently leading that investigation.
Now, to ask the $64,000 question. Why has the commentator went so far back in digging up some dirt on some Tennessee officials in relation to what is going on today with Donald Trump? Obviously, there's similarities. Similarities in how people think that they can abuse their authority. They can abuse their position. They can abuse their power. Does this mean that the elected president, Joe Biden, needs to be sworn in early to prevent any other damage coming from Donald Trump? I really don't know where this commentator is going to be going with this other than promoting the idea of actually doing something like this. Like I said, this is all news to me. If I did hear anything about the scandal that happened in 78 versus 79, it was beyond me because I was at that time not thinking of anything that was going on with our court systems or pertaining to our political stance. But this history lesson tonight, I'm going to call it a history lesson, is absolutely intriguing in thinking that the only way to stop the runaway horse from doing any more damage towards the horse that's running away is to go ahead and grab up the other horse. That way that horse gets to run with the other horse, but the other horse that you put into the race is more gentle and more tame, to the point that it's not so much a runaway horse, but it's just another horse. It's another horse that shares the same power, the same responsibilities. This is bizarre in how that this commentator is bringing this to the forefront, and how that she is comparing apples to apples to peaches. Very interesting.
And now tonight, this is how the president started talking in a truly bizarre speech posted live on Facebook that originated from the actual White House.
All it's been is a big investigation in Washington and New York and any place else that can investigate, because that's what they want to do. They want to take not me, but us down. And we can never let them do that. Everything's been looked at. A friend of mine who's very smart said, you've probably seen more than anybody else. You've probably been investigated more than anybody else. And for you to come out with a clean bill of health makes you probably the cleanest person in this country. Some people in this administration, but fortunately not all, have been beaten down and disparaged. They just disappeared.
They just disappeared. The people who you thought would protect you from, but the president tonight made this long, rambly 46-minute Facebook statement from the White House in which most of the time was spent making wild and false allegations that somehow he didn't just lose re-election. But he did. And no, before you ask, no, they can't move up the federal inauguration date for a new president, the way they did for that governor in Tennessee back in 1979. The presidential inauguration date is in the Constitution. That's not changing, no matter who wants to change it. The only way the presidential handover of power might materially change this year is if President Trump is persuaded that he needs not just pardons for his whole family, but if he's persuaded that he needs a pardon himself. The way he's talking about how he's the cleanest person in the entire country, but the investigations just won't stop, kind of sounds like he may be coming around to that frame of mind. Any president trying to pardon himself would be legally suspect, would be the first time that's ever happened, and there's no guarantee that it would hold up. If the president really believes that he needs a pardon himself, conceivably he might decide he needs to resign before January 20th, so Mike Pence would briefly become president. In that short time, Mike Pence could then issue a Trump pardon. So conceivably they might try something like that, which would alter the course of how the presidential handoff of power is going to happen. Something like that would be inconceivable at any other time, but this is the time that we are living through right now, and I think there's no reason to consider anything off the table. If nothing quite that dramatic happens, I suppose we'll just keep stretching this out another 49 days, wondering about that Justice Department investigation into selling pardons, wondering what else might happen, what else he might try to break as he leaves. In terms of the Republican Party's own political interests, this is what some of that breakage looks like tonight.
Where's Kelly Loeffler here? Where's David Perdue? He ought to be standing right here. Those two people want your vote, then they ought to tell you what we're telling Brian Kemp. Get a special session of the legislature now. Do not be fooled twice. This is Georgia. We ain't dumb. We're not going to go vote on January 5th in another machine made by China. You're not going to fool Georgians again. If Kelly Loeffler wants your vote, if David Perdue wants your vote, they've got to earn it. They've got to demand publicly, repeatedly, consistently, Brian Kemp call a special session of the Georgia legislature, and if they do not do it, if Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue do not do it, they have not earned your vote. Don't you give it to them.
Don't you give him your vote. Don't you give him your vote. We're not dumb. Don't be fooled twice. We're not going to go vote on January 5th for those Republican senators. This post-election act by which Rudy Giuliani appears to be singing for his supper, dancing for his chance at a pardon from the president, has now devolved into a fairly crazed political environment in which the president's lawyers really are actively telling Trump-supporting Republican voters, including the guy wearing the MAGA hat while he does it, telling them they should not vote for the Republicans who are up for Senate seats in Georgia next month. They shouldn't go out and vote. They shouldn't get fooled twice. We won't vote the way they voted in Georgia. I mean, those two Senate seats will determine whether Republicans or Democrats are in control in the Senate. They'll determine whether or not Mitch McConnell is running the Senate or Chuck Schumer is. There is a sharpening divergence now between the interests of the Republican Party and the interests of the president. What he sees as his interests and what his strange and, in some cases, desperate lawyers are doing to try to please him, given what he sees as his interests. Nobody quite knows what Republicans are prepared to do about this divergence between what the president wants for himself and what the Republican Party needs to hold on to power. As the effort to defy the election results by the president gets more liminal and weird and more failed, and also more dangerous to the Republican Party's interests, the president could sort of let it wither, right? Could let it sort of drain off into the weird Facebook nether regions in which it lives now. But he does appear to be trying to revivify it. This 3/4 of an hour long screed from the White House tonight. And yes, it had to be carried live on Facebook. Facebook, bless your hearts, because who else is going to run this much dangerous lying designed to unwire the democracy of the United States of America? Facebook will do it. I mean, that's what's going on at the top of the U.S. federal government right now.
Good God.
That's what this lame duck period is.
Good
And,
grief.
you know, this is the United States of America. This isn't some podunk, corrupt Dixiecrat Tennessee governor selling off surplus state cars and liquor licenses and handing out pardons for his friend's sons for $20,000 in a paper bag. This isn't that. This is the dressed up 2020 federal iteration of that in another lame duck period. And in this case, with no clear way to stop it.
Wow.
And the most important difference between then and now, between there and here, is that this time, what we're living through right now is happening while this is happening too.
Coronavirus.
This is the hospitalization numbers right now nationwide.
Wow.
We thought it couldn't get any worse than it was in the spring, right? These are the numbers from the COVID tracking project. This is today's daily death toll.
Wow.
2,733 Americans dead in a day.
Good
We are very
God.
quickly heading toward 3,000 Americans dead in a day,
Good
toward the number of
God.
Americans who died on 9/11 dying every day.
My Lord.
Today, while the president was doing his Energizer Bunny Destroys Democracy speech at the White House, carried live on Facebook. Elsewhere at the White House, we learned that the coronavirus task force is now advising local public health officials that they should go rogue and they should defy bad local leadership at the municipal or state level if they need to, because they now need to start telling the American people a very blunt message. The White House Coronavirus Task Force now advising local public health officials that they need to tell the local population where they are, whatever else is happening with local leadership, they need to tell people where they are. If you are over 65 and you have a health condition, do not enter any public space where anyone is unmasked. If you are over 65 or have any significant health conditions, do not enter any indoor public space where people are unmasked. If you are under the age of 40 and you gathered with people you don't live with over Thanksgiving, the White House is now telling local public officials to advise people under 40 who gathered with people they didn't live with during Thanksgiving that they must assume that they became infected over the Thanksgiving holiday. You are now dangerous to others and you must isolate, even though you likely do not have symptoms.
Monday, I went to a nutritionist doctor that ordinarily I don't go to, pertaining to my diabetes and my weight. More so my weight than the diabetes. And while I was in there discussing various tactics of what to do and what not to do and how much to eat and how much not to eat and what to eat, what types of food to eat, we entertained the idea about coronavirus. And I went ahead and volunteered to do a blood test to determine whether or not I have ever been exposed to the coronavirus. Haven't got the results back yet because today's just Wednesday, but I feel like either tomorrow or no later than Friday, I'll find out through the McKenzie Medical Center, working through Dr. Amy Grant, that I'll know if I have been exposed to the coronavirus, of whether or not I carry that gene in my blood system. But the main thing I want to say right now is that obviously health officials are reading the writing on the wall towards what we have just experienced pertaining to Thanksgiving. I don't forget now how many millions of flights was in the air this past weekend pertaining to people traveling. I think they estimated something like 30 million people on the road versus 34 million last year. So obviously, these experts, the professionals, must be reading something that looks devastating or that looks incredibly horrible for them to put out this type of a warning. Once more, we're trying to juggle all these balls at the same time. We're trying to deal with an illegitimate president that knows that the elections was not rigged, but demands that they was. We're dealing with all these irregularities that the Bible says is and would and will come about in the last days. A perilous times will fall upon to the nations. You may be asking, well, Dennis, what happened to the ideal of peace and utopia, love and grace and mercy? Well, you know, those are the things that you need to ask the pillars of the society that had an opportunity of supporting the windmill ministries, but for some incredible, horrible reason, they chose not to. They chose to go down the path that they went down for the past 30 plus some odd years that has now presently put us where we are. It is one of the most saddest events that I can ever recall reading or hearing about or looking at that has ever occurred here in America, other than possibly the Civil War or the attack upon to the Native American people. It is absolutely horrifying to see and to hear and to know that right now, out of the movement of a revival, evolution, let me get my words right, elevating into a revolution towards re-revolutionizing not just the nation but the planet, that if things would have been handled properly in the late 80s with the Reagan and the Bush administration, right now we could all be receiving prosperity, peace, and yes, utopia. You talk about going an about face. You talk about going in the complete, total opposite direction. Since the people in the White House was given the instructions how that the world was not going to end by a nuclear holocaust, but that it would end the way that the Heavenly Father had predicted for it to end. You talk about people going in the wrong direction. This is the results of it. Let's back up just a little bit Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the facts. And the facts are very scary. December the 2nd, Wednesday in 2020. And that fact right there, 2,733 beautiful, beautiful lives are no longer with us in the existence up onto this planet that we call Mother Earth. Are we going to start venturing off or entertaining the ideal that every day we're going to see numbers similar or even compassing that in which what we experienced during 9/11, September the 11th? Whenever September the 11th hit, it literally horrified the planet. It horrified other great nations and countries all over the planet. You keep in mind that these numbers here are just in regard to that country right there, the United States of America. We're not talking about the death toll numbers all over the planet. I don't even have a clue. I haven't seen that chart in probably about 2 months now towards just exactly how much human life has been lost on the planet level. I'm pretty sure it's at least 2 million, possibly 3 million by now. Whenever I was looking at it a few months ago, it had done already compassed 1 million deaths worldwide. This is out of control, folks. If there's ever been a time that we needed good, top-notch leadership, it's today. We don't need reoccurrences towards what went on in 78 and 79. Give or take about a 3-hour drive from here in the music town called Nashville, Tennessee. Matter of fact, we don't need nothing that even remotely comes close to anything like that. But the way it looks, it almost looks like a total reenactment. It's just being done now on a federal scale versus a state scale. This is so mind-boggling and heartbreaking. These stereotypes that have caused this. These people that supposedly knew the Bible and could understand the Bible and they was educated. The people that was supposed to have been the experts. The pillars of the community have let the rest of us down. While somebody such as myself was screaming and hollering in the night, steadily being ignored, steadily being dehumanized, steadily being laughed at, made fun of, demonized and dehumanized, even at the age of 59 years old. Coming back into an environment that, to be quite honest with you, I wouldn't ask for my worst enemy to have to suffer the way that my brother and I suffered since I've come back here in 2014. It has been one of the most hellish moments of my entire life. disgraceful. Don't even begin to start the meaning of what has occurred here after an individual has put out 30 years of his life and going to church building after church building after church building after church building, and now we're seeing what the people have done. A travesty? No. This isn't a travesty. This goes beyond a travesty. Because this could have been prevented. This runaway train could have been stopped. And I'm just not talking about my particular life going back 30 plus years ago, but I'm just talking about how the unprofessionalism of the presidency downplayed and downgraded the severity of all this because he said that he didn't want to start a panic. As I have said, and I'll say again, sometimes it's necessary if you're in a theater or a coliseum to cry, fire, 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 or help, 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 especially if there really is a fire, especially if somebody needs emergency medical assistance, especially if something has gone haywire towards somebody pulling out a gun like they done up in Colorado and went to shooting and killing a bunch of innocent people during a movie. Sometimes it's necessary to start that panic that Donald Trump so desperately claims that he didn't want to start. And because the cry did not go out properly, the battle cry in regards to fighting this coronavirus, we will see numbers like this. That is just absolutely mind-boggling in the severity of the lethalness of this disease. I had a loved one this year that I lost up in Nashville, Tennessee, Miss Bobby Sue. I just met a woman 3 days ago on the Christmas aisle in Walmart, explaining to me that she had lost her brother and that she hadn't been out in 3.5 months because of her grieving over losing her brother. An acquaintance of mine that helped the Oklahoma authorities in planting a bomb in the back end of my truck, in destroying the camper shell that was on the truck at the time, simply because I was snooping, getting too close to the truth towards what had occurred out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, has recently told me within the past 3 days that he has buried 5 good friends in less than a 10-day period. That's a death every other day, just for one person. I realize and understand that the people around here haven't caught on yet in the severity of this because it's been lagging towards coming into this area. But I'm finding out more and more each day that it's here. It just isn't being announced like it is in your bigger cities, like Nashville Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, LA. But those are the staggering, heart-wrenching numbers of today. That we have lost. 2,733. You know, every time I convince myself and I try to tell myself, well, you know, it can't get no worse. Kind of like whenever 9/11 hit, the death of almost 3,000 people, or even the death of 168 people that died during the Oklahoma bombing. You keep telling yourself it can't get no worse. It just can't get no worse. And I'll be darned if the day that passes throughout the day that was before exceeds the record of doing just exactly that. So where's it going to stop? And when's it going to stop? The Bible teaches us and tells us to repent, for God has not yet found our works perfect. To go back and to do thy first works over again. He also expresses very clearly in those same 4 chapters of Revelations that because we didn't repent, that he will scatter the reins in the hearts of men, and we will see just exactly what we're seeing right now on a supernatural level. This isn't a metaphor. This is the real deal. This nation has made a big, big mistake. And now, consequently, people are paying for it.
Today, while the president was doing his Energizer Bunny Destroys Democracy speech at the White House, carried live on Facebook. Elsewhere at the White House, we learned that the coronavirus task force is now advising local public health officials that they should go rogue and they should defy bad local leadership at the municipal or state level if they need to, because they now need to start telling the American people a very blunt message. The White House Coronavirus Task Force now advising local public health officials that they need to tell the local population where they are, whatever else is happening with local leadership, they need to tell people where they are. If you are over 65 and you have a health condition, do not enter any public space where anyone is unmasked. If you are over 65 or have any significant health conditions, do not enter any indoor public space where people are unmasked. If you are under the age of 40 and you gathered with people you don't live with over Thanksgiving, the White House is now telling local public officials to advise people under 40 who gathered with people they didn't live with during Thanksgiving that they must assume that they became infected over the Thanksgiving holiday. You are now dangerous to others and you must isolate, even though you likely do not have symptoms. These things are happening all at once. A careening proverbial car crash